Welcome to the Today's Leader podcast. Building tomorrow's best leaders, today.
Way to go, guys. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul, I see you. All right, Travis, finish. Coach Carl.
Great job, guys.
Hey there, it's Coach Carl here, and welcome to episode 411 of the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Today features one of the most challenging interviews that I've ever had, for me personally. Now, the concepts presented today by our guest is a real shift of thinking in relation to how we traditionally think about business and leadership. She shatters many beliefs. And if you've thought about things like maintaining a status quo, today it will be shattered. Your mind will be blown. Her insights include things like indigenous wisdom, living systems, quantum cosmology, and it's such an amazing journey to awareness, and you'll see during the course of the interview how challenged I am about bringing these concepts that our guest talks about to life within me. Our guest today is Carol Sanford. Now, she is a senior fellow of social innovation at Basban College. She's the CEO of the Regenerative Paradigm Institute. She's an educator, she's a social change designer, and she really builds communities around people who are aspiring to make a difference. Business and organizational teams pursuing meaning and work and business effectiveness. She's the author of 5, probably 6 books by now, including the Regenerative Life, Transform Any Organization, Our Society, Your Destiny, No More Feedback, the Regenerative Business. It is an amazing journey that Carol has been on, and it's an amazing journey that Carol takes us on during today's interview. Now, all 5 of the books that she's written are built around case studies of specific transformation in people, business, communities, and regions. It is such an eye-opening experience today. I hope you stick around, because after a word from our sponsor, please open your mind and allow the rush of wisdom to come in as we welcome Carol Sanford to the Today's Leader podcast.
The podcast is brought to you by Think and Grow Business, the home of the Think and Grow Business Mastermind. If you're serious about growing your business, get serious and join a mastermind group today. Find out more at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au.
And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome Carol Sanford. How are you, Carol?
I'm excellent, thank you. And you, Tony?
It's Saturday morning here. I've just come back from a 9-kilometer run and I feel great. So
glad to hear it.
So, Carol, you're quite an intriguing person to me at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So let's start with a very general question. Share the Carol Sanford story.
Well, I've been around a long time, so I'll give you a couple of key points along the way. I think the most life-changing event in my life was when I was an undergraduate at UC Berkeley and got to study with a man named Thomas Kuhn, who wrote the book Structure of Scientific Revolution about paradigm shift. And I always thought there was a truth, and eventually we'd figure it out. No, I know what Kuhn said was we're constantly changing. We go from kind of one belief system to another, and scientists, and that blew my mind, and it has set the tone for everything I've done, which is understanding what paradigm people are in. In other words, what are they using to frame how they see the world? I did a whole lot of study along the way, but mostly I formed membership groups where people come to study together for decades. I have people who've been in my communities. There are two of them. One is for change agents, people who want to help make the world better, and their business as a part of that. And the other one is for business teams that have been everywhere from DuPont to Google to small organizations, including permaculture farmers, etc. What I have done with those membership communities is build a very cohesive set of several thousand people around the world, from Australia to India to North and South America, all over Europe, Africa. I worked in Africa for years. And what it is that my life has said to me is the most important thing people have to do is notice that they don't notice how they notice. I've never said it that way, but we don't know that we pre-interpret everything. And so the fact that we have made up a story in our head about how the world works keeps us from really innovating, keeps us from seeing what is happening. So my story is about going from thinking I would be a consultant to instead being an educator, and knowing that educating people on their ability to see how they're thinking, how they're framing things, determines whether they will ever be successful, whether they will make a difference, whether they will bring something unique to the market. And so I build capacity to think and be and do from consciousness.
Wow. I did a little bit of work with Steve Maraboli going back a number of years, and Steve always talked about our agreement with reality. It's the story that we tell ourselves.
Right.
And it's a powerful thing to understand when you can pick up the story that people are telling themselves. But are you saying to me that there's different stories?
Yeah.
It could be a different story at any particular time.
Well, even with the same people, I look at my own story. When I was a very young child, I was raised to be as racist as they could possibly make me, because my father saw the world through literally black, white, brown, and believed that some people were good and bad based on the skin color. Now, he wasn't very successful at educating me, although he punished me, did everything he could. But what it did is made me curious about, why does he see people I'm looking at a different way than I do? So I could see our stories were different. And I could see, even as I got a little older, a teenager and in college, that I was beginning to question things. And so my own way of seeing the world was slowly evolving. But I realized I was going to have to be active about that, because I was culturally indoctrinated. I grew up in a very conservative church, conservative family, and I realized that just kind of questioning wasn't going to get me there. So I actively started doing things like going to South Africa and working during the time Mandela was coming into power and the change there. And I put myself in situations which I knew would, confuse me and scare me. And make myself look at what was happening. And I could see, and this is really to your question, I could see that I was changing. I could watch it in real time. And so then I got very excited about that. I could do that if I had different experiences, different ways of looking at it. I played with Colgate Palmolive there for 3 years on rebuilding how their business was going to work, how they were going to support the new South Africa. All that told me so much about how much more pliable our mind is based on what we allow ourselves to see. But if we don't work on it, we will stay stuck in the way that I was and the way my father was.
Okay. That's so. How do you work with people in relation to this? So is it like, obviously you've been able to create that challenge. You've challenged yourself, got you into a very uncomfortable place of discomfort.
And still do all the time.
But how do you work with others? Because I can understand how it can be self-driven.
Right.
And that's awesome. But when you're working with someone else, it's often very hard for them to see their own story.
Right. So I created an institute that's about education. Plus, I teach in universities and other things. I teach people how to see their own mind at work and not to judge themselves. So, for example, I give them something I call frameworks, which are to erode models. We get mental models and stuck on them in our mind. I give people a framework to question them. So let's take an example. In South Africa, one of the first frameworks I taught them to use to assess themselves and their groups was something called modes of behavior. Are you in a reactive mode? Are you in an ego? I've got to be best, top dog. Are you in a purposeful mode to make a difference when you're looking at this? So I had 8 tribes in South Africa, and plus the Afrikaners who were Dutch descendants and the English, all of whom were colonists there. And I got them to talk to each other about what made them reactive and what made them their ego get on their high horse or way off, and they didn't have enough confidence. And when were they being purposeful to have the company and South Africa and their township and their family to be able to contribute and prosper? And I did hundreds of frameworks like that. That was a personal one, learning to see yourself. But I gave them things like, can you tell when you say growth, what do you mean? Did you know there are 3 different kinds of growth? And the most basic one is expansion. It's what everybody means. And it's the worst way in the world to grow a company because it means you have more of what you sell, sold the same stuff from more people or different people, but there's nothing new in there. But if you went to an evolution mode of growth, you'd be asking, what could we displace because only we can do it? How can we create offerings that are needed in the world? And there's something filling that gap, but it's not what's really possible. If we were going to bring our essence, our distinctiveness to it, how would we supplant that? And you will grow a market. I grow companies at about 35 to 65% per annum in revenue growth when they switch between those two, and then there's another one in the middle.
Okay. You've written 5 books.
6 will be out. The 6th will be out in 2 weeks.
Okay. You've written almost 6 books. So
Yeah.
you are the CEO of the Regenerative Paradigm Institute. You're also described as a social change designer.
Yeah.
Walk me through what's a social change designer?
I think I was marketed as that by Babson College, which is our #1 entrepreneurial. It's rated every year as the top entrepreneurial school in the U.S., Babson. They named me a senior fellow of social innovation.
Yeah.
And what they looked at was that the way I work, and I really agree with this, is I'm working on change of social systems through using businesses and changing how their social infrastructure works. So there are no longer any hierarchies in how I work, but I don't get rid of supervisors. There's a different pay and progression, which changes how you think about yourself out in the world. There's different decisions a business makes about how to run itself, which changes how society works. It changes how people go out and parent. So my new book is called Indirect Work. So what I do is work on a business and indirectly change all the things that are happening in society and social systems, including how we engage with Earth. So that's what it means. You can innovate in the way society moves by not trying to change laws and policies and activism. All that makes it worse. Instead, I work on how institutions function, which are framing how society works. Does that make sense? At least a little bit?
It does. I mean, you're throwing quite a lot at me, Carol, and that's good. So it's about the flow on the social benefits that all businesses potentially should be able to have within their own circle of influence.
Well, and I think that the reason I chose to work with businesses is because they have so much impact. The way we educate children, the way we run school systems, the way we have social justice and equality, all those things are birthed inside of an institution. And
Yep.
then those people go out in the world and they vote based on what they're experiencing. They activate, they do live their life. So if you really want to make big change, you start with the most influential impact on that. And so that's what I do, and it is a social innovation thing. But as I pointed out, my companies grow like a wildfire.
And your studies are obviously highly rated as well. I'm just looking at indirect work now, and the summary on your website in and around it, and I'm looking at these words: quantum cosmology, about
Right.
how the universe works on individual, social, and planetary level. Now, knowing some of the business leaders that I work with, they're going to look at those two words, quantum cosmology,
Yeah.
and tune out or
Right.
get assertive, or they're just going to say that's woohoo, or without even understanding what it is. So help me understand first what it is, and to help some of those leaders that are listening, that maybe to open up to some of these concepts. But I'm
Well,
intrigued. What is quantum cosmology?
Okay, first, I hope I have their attention by pointing out that my businesses grow more rapidly financially than the average business grows. So there's something here, but it's not something we normally pay attention to. It's shifting from, as Thomas Kuhn said, the paradigm of Newton and the paradigm of Einstein. So
Yeah.
Einstein, obviously quantum. So Newton's paradigm, and the way we've used it for the last 400 years, is the whole world is a billiard ball table. This is Einstein's description. And he said, we have to let go of that because it's like somebody else defines what pockets everybody should be in. The cue balls are the people we want to move, either our employees or society, and the cue stick is in our hands. And we're very smart. We think if we hit that person as an employee or that supplier, they'll go in the pocket we want them to. He said, what we don't understand is that never was true. Newton was looking at rocks, which were not alive. He was looking, basic physics. And all the laws that he's talking about are dead things. They're things that don't move. Quantum disproved, in terms of living things, the fit of that paradigm. So quantum says, just so we take the same billiard ball metaphor, it says if you hit a ball, a person, you want an employee to improve, toward a pocket, you have no guarantee where it will go. You think you are first, you know where they should go, that you can, by your precise movements, incentives, rewards, all of that, you can get them there. You're actually degenerating your culture. You are degenerating the capacity of every individual to think well. And quantum cosmology says if you create the capability of people to have critical thinking skills and self-management, and you connect them not to their boss, not to their company, not even necessarily to the corporation they're part of in any way, but to that which they serve, that customer, that client, that market, and you give them the opportunity to choose their own pocket. So when I had, let's talk about a one in South Africa, since I mentioned it earlier, we gave, I say we, I mean, the general manager say so, we helped, or gave me permission and support to rebuild. So every individual was committing to something beyond the company. So Isaac Michiel, who was a detergent tower operator, said, I want to be able to build tons of entrepreneurs in Soweto, which was his township, in a way that they can grow small businesses, they can get their families healthier, and we want to support them in doing that with products. So Isaac built several thousand small women selling products that Colgate made at their cost for them.
Yeah.
And it changed the township, changed them being in charge of their own lives. Isaac went from being a detergent tower operator to me one of the primary leaders because every week or every month I was there building capability to think better, to serve all of this. And instead of Colgate giving incentives to all these people to produce more, they became drivers of the organization, which productivity, I've forgotten the numbers on it, but it was through the roof and with half the number of people. But if they tried to do it with incentives, people would have figured out how to beat the incentives, right? How to get their share. Instead, you have every person get connected with who they are and what difference they want to make. I call them promises beyond ableness. Then what you have is every leader who is wishing that their people had the right incentive and rewards realize all that gets in the way. So you build a different kind of organization, a different kind of culture. You make lots of money, but you make lots of difference in everything you touch.
It's
And that's, let me finish 1 second. That's a quantum cosmology I'm drawing from. I'm drawing from, instead of you manipulating the ball in the pocket, you give capability, which is what Einstein said. We have to use a different paradigm. You give capability and infrastructure for people to innovate in, and they will take your company over the top. That's a quantum cosmology versus a Newtonian one. Can you feel that?
I'm fascinated. But I can understand exactly how it works because, I mean, for leadership coaches, leadership development people have been talking about aligning people to their purpose and their vision of the business now for years. But
yeah, I don't do that. I think that's garbage.
But you're talking about igniting the fire, so to speak, of their own authentic self and their own purpose, and how then the company can support that.
Right. And how they support one another. So I don't believe in visioning that the company does and connecting everybody to the vision. That's billiard ball. We're going to create the pockets, and then we're going to align people and usually do coaching and rewarding. All of it's internal. None of this is internal structuring. You create the infrastructure for people to define what they're going to do outside, not inside. And it takes about 3 to 8 years to rebuild this culture, but you start making more money and not losing your employees from day one.
Yeah. And that's got to make sense to business owners. And
it does. All my work, by the way, is by referral. I won't accept someone who hasn't talked with, lived with, and get in one of my communities. You have to be invited by a current member because you can't sell this stuff. You have to find people who want to make that level of difference. And like you said, you're open. They have to have a discovery. And people who come to me came because they are curious about what I'm doing. I don't even have nobody wants to have a conversation with me about why I'm using stupid words like quantum cosmology. They say, what does that mean? And what does that do for my business? Now, let's talk.
You've written 6 books and focused around business. Can I just dive in and ask about the premise around No More Feedback, which is one of your books? And it's about cultivating consciousness at work is the subtitle. Walk me through what that one's about, because communication and feedback in particular is one of those biggest challenges so many leaders face. But here you are saying, hey, no more feedback.
No, stop it. You can't fix it. It's off of a wrong premise. So it's related to the conversation we were just having. By the way, Tom Peters, who wrote In Search of Excellence, you know that book?
Yeah.
Tom found No More Feedback, and he has promoted it everywhere. He said, Carol Sanford is one of the top 5 management thinkers this century so far. Wow. This book is so well researched and so well thought out. So let's just start with a little credibility building, and then, because most of what I'm going to say to you is going to sound wrong for a minute. Okay, I told you it's going to sound wrong. There's a guy named John Watson in the year 1900 who wanted to make a name for himself in the School of Psychology, and so he broke off from the philosophy department and convinced people to fund him studying rats in a lab so that he could show them how to control people. And business leaders funded him. Big name business said, we would love to be able to control our employees. And even Watson acknowledges this is what he was doing, teaching them to control them.
Yeah.
Now, you can't study rats and understand humans, because rats don't have frontal lobes. They don't have ability to think. They have an amygdala, but it's very small. The ability to work as family units is not high. Mostly they're reactive critters. You get anywhere near them and they hide, right? And you feed them and they'll stay there, but you don't want to be studying rats, which was all he ever studied. Well, a few of the competitive nature monkeys. And he introduced something that we are still driven by, and it's making our democracies not work, making our businesses and our families not work, which was humans have no consciousness. They can't see themselves. They can't be self-managing. They must be externally determined. They must be told what to think. They must be told how to interpret things. And then you must use cause and effect of certain kinds of incentives, rewards, and punishment to manage them. Now, companies like, J.P. Morgan and the big oil companies, including the Rockefellers, all love that he gave them a method for managing people, like, as he said, just like you manage your machines.
Yeah.
That has lived for now about 100 years, 110 years since he introduced it. And the schools of psychology at Columbia and Johns Hopkins and the University of Chicago decided to grow the field of psychology by promoting everything in behaviorism. We now think behaviorism is true, but it's not. There is nothing true about you need external input to be able, and you can never see yourself. Feedback is external, telling you can't, and people even say to me all the time, but we can't see yourself. And I said, oh, you got brainwashed. You got told something and you believe it. Do you think it's true for you? Have you ever changed anything for yourself? Well, sure I have, but most people can't. Well, the real truth is that is not consciousness developed. We are leaving on the table one of the most powerful ablenesses that humans can have, which is to be self-regulating. And that was one thing I learned and overcome. And I'll never get rid of all my racism. I have to work on it all the time.
Yeah.
But I worked on it with my own conscience. I didn't have somebody come and say, you're racist and you need to do this and that and work on diversity and inclusion. I worked on me, and I teach other people how to do that. So consciousness at work, the subtitle here, is every company I build, I don't build with any external feedback. Behaviorism is evaporated. And of course, the finances go through the roof, the contribution goes through the roof, but also the capacity of people to be self-managing. So No More Feedback is full of about 20 stories of where all of my books are full of case stories. So you can see where it happened, how it happened. And so I give you an alternative, but it's not, people say, well, what do you do if you can't do feedback? How do you do it? And I said, you don't. The alternative is building the capacity of every human being to be able to see whether they're on automatic and being driven by outside, by being sensitive. So they're starting to pick up, like you're being very sensitive to me right now. You're really paying attention. You're trying to figure out where I'm going next and what you're going to do with it. That's sensitive mental energy. Consciousness, I can see you reaching for, which is, what does this mean? Well, how can I pose a question that would really bring forward something my folks could use, my leaders could use? Learning to be able to see what level of mental energy we're at and manage it is all we have to do. We teach that to people. Then you set up the infrastructure where there's continual reflection, sharing with one another, and the power is amazing because now you have a conscious workforce, not one manipulated from the outside. That whole book is about all the false premises, No More Feedback, that are lies that we have adopted and are letting ruin our lives, ruin our democracies, ruin our families, ruin our schools. So that's what No More Feedback's about.
Carol, can it work for everyone?
It absolutely can. Every human being. I have had a few people in South Africa. there was a constitutional, I can't remember whether it was an amendment or was in the original Constitution, that required every corporation, whether you were an expat or a local one, that you had to have the top of your organization, the top 5%,
Okay.
match what the population, the racial population looked like. And of course, in South Africa, the population is 97% black Africans, 3% white. Guess what the top of Colgate looked like? The opposite of that, right? And you had to do that within 5 years. We did it in 6 months. 6
Okay.
months. And Mandela gave them an award he named it the Constitutional Award because they proved to everyone you could do this. Now, he asked them, how did you do this? And Stelio Sesos, the GM for Africa, said, we gave people back their mind completely. We gave them back the capability, which in case of black Africans, they'd been forbidden to be in school for 100 years. He said, once you build the capacity of the mind, no one will ever go away, and there's no one who can't do it. We had one guy who left, an Afrikaner who I think we just scared him to death, is all I can say. And he went out, created his own automobile repair company, and literally hid. It had nothing to do with that he couldn't do this. It had to do with his personal state of being. So we're working on both of those together. We're working on the capacity to see your own mind and manage yourself, and to create a whole different kind of infrastructure so there's no punishment and reward. If there's no one, and I've never tried to work with people who had mental challenges from birth. But I do know that families have done that, and they said even if you have cerebral palsy, we had one. If you have mental retardation, we had a handful of folks I knew about, all of which each of those people blossomed when you quit trying to train them like rats.
Yeah. If there was the status quo, Carol, I think you've just blown it away. You've just thrown it down and shattered it. So, and hopefully everyone's listening with a really open mind.
So can I pick up on one thing you started? I'm going to help you out a little here. Quantum cosmology is one of the three things in indirect work. And I say these are the three things you have to change. And they're based on also indigenous wisdom. So I have a grandfather who was half Mohawk, was raised the first 10 years of his life in an Oklahoma native reservation. And he had a whole different worldview from my father. And he helped me see the world in living systems terms. So a lot of what I do comes from that thread, which is ancient.
Okay.
By the way, this is my way of saying, you said you have, and I think all I've done is been a translator for brilliant people who have created this. So native indigenous groups have always believed that individuals can become something great if you help them discover who they are and where they can contribute. I use quantum theory. I also use indigenous, but there's a third, which is I have spent time in a lot of lineage schools. I started in Buddhism. I spent time in Mahayana Buddhism, particularly with Hindu, particularly Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. When I was an undergraduate, I spent a lot of time with Socrates and the pre-Socratics and political philosophy, so that I'm drawing on the wisdom of centuries. And I didn't create any of it. I created translations or transliterations and frameworks that have people who are in DuPont. The chairman, the president, CEO of DuPont wrote the foreword to my first book. He said it changed his life. The third book, the foreword, is written by Google vice president. The fourth one was by a smaller business, but was bought, it's called Seventh Generation, but was bought by Unilever. And Jeffrey Hollander, who was the founder and CEO, said, this not only changed my life forever, but it changed how I run every business and everything I've ever done. So that's because what I'm bringing forward are ancient wisdom, including quantum was always in many of these other traditions, but we humans got off track with Newton and with John Watson behaviorism. And I'm trying to help bring it back. My 7th book, which will be out in 2023, is a scathing report on the things that created behaviorism and the damage it's done and what we can do about it.
Carol, it's been absolutely fascinating. I'm going to ask you some very generic questions that I ask every guest now. And I'm not sure of what the answer is going to be like after you've just exploded my world. And what I'm certainly going to be doing is looking more into what you've written, because I'm really keen to understand more. But my first question is, who's been the inspiration for you as you've traveled down this journey?
No one alive. I rarely find inspiration from the popular psychologists and so forth. My grandfather, certainly, and in my 4th book, The Regenerative Life, which is written for individuals to understand this, I tell a lot of the story of how my grandfather worked with me and where we went with all that. Certainly Thomas Kuhn, when I met him, he was a guest lecturer at Berkeley while I was my last 2 years of undergraduate work there. And being able to sit in a classroom, and he did to me what you say I'm doing to you. I had the same experience of, what is he talking about? My God, it's fascinating. It sounds right. There's something here, and I can still feel what it felt like sitting in that room and having him disrupt everything I'd ever believed. And then there was a man who I met when I was 33 named Charles Crone, who had done a lot of work in quantum understanding. And I hung out with him for quite a few years and learned about frameworks. So I would say that, and on my Facebook page, I think I have a little handout you can do for free on my 3 major teachers. But none of them are alive at the moment.
Okay.
They will be again.
What about failure? So tell me about your relationship that you have with failure.
I don't believe in failure. That's a behavioral idea. It's full of false premises. Like there are points, and it's all in the lowest world of thinking, which is you do and you succeed or not. Until you're dead, and even then I'm pretty sure you're not done, you're in an evolutionary journey. And the whole idea that we decide to make something black and white, good and bad, success, failure, right, wrong, is all the oldest Newtonian paradigm that exists.
Wow.
What you want to be is in a process of daily discovery, daily self-reflection, daily just moving, thinking. And the idea that you should judge that in any point of success or failure is certainly a waste of time, but it's a waste of mental process and of how to think about things. So I've never had a failure in my whole life, and I don't expect to in this life or the next.
I'm just sitting here thinking about all those leaders that are listening to this and then thinking, I'm going to use that at my next performance review. You know, when they say, tell me about your failures, and I'm going to talk about daily discoveries and curiosity. And
well, I wish they would. You've got to have a context and infrastructure for that. If you say it, you're going to still feel the old paradigm. But you have to rebuild the way I'm talking about. You can get a feel for that in the responsible business and the regenerative business, how we rebuild all that infrastructure. And you get a feel of how we did it with book number 6, Indirect Work, if you allow me to say that, which is a regenerative change theory for businesses, institutions, communities, and humans. And then you can learn more about what you have to build and how. And I've got thousands of people who are working with me. I'm pretty much stopping being out in the world. I don't travel anymore. I'm 80 years old. So I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to keep building that capability of bringing business teams together in my regenerative business development communities and change agents in the change agent communities. I have seeds that are spreading, and they're in every continent. So if you want to connect to them, these folks want to ask more, I'm pretty easy to find. Carol Sanford is you put it in a search engine, it'll give you 3 or 4 pages of
Yeah.
my communities, my books. I have a podcast called Business Second Opinion that critiques business articles, particularly Harvard Business Review, one article at a time, and says, here's why it's out of the old paradigm and here's what to do instead. So they can come get a little help on their performance review, which, by the way, also should go away. There should be no such thing.
Well, you're not the first person that suggested they need to go
I've
away.
been saying
that's
it
for
for
sure.
40 years, though.
Carol, what's the well? I think you've just talked about what the future is for you. It's more book. It's more about building your tribe. And can I just say, you built a tribe before building a tribe was the done thing to do, by the sounds of it.
I don't build tribes. Tribe is a paradigm that means people get attached to one another and make everybody else wrong and go to war with them. None of these people are attached to me. And I don't want them to be. I want them to be attached, or you have to have some attachments or you die. But I want people to be connected to, not me as a person, but the ideas that I'm helping bring in, the people I'm helping build, and the potential of all that. And I've got a few more years, we'll see. But I've got people running companies all over the world now, and I don't let people give me credit for things. So you won't find me in the big journals, but you go ask people what they've been learning and how they've been working, you'll hear some of this. And a lot of people pick up my terminology. And like value added was borrowed, I guess you'd say, by Michael Porter when he toured a P&G system me and my colleagues helped develop. And he didn't get it. He missed it. And he said, well, we're going to talk about value added, where you add value and you get more. No, our whole system was a value adding process where you continuously are adding something into the world. And if you can't let go of that old paradigm, you can never see what the power is. I keep writing books so you can find these people.
Absolutely. Carol, it's been an absolute pleasure today speaking with you for the Today's Leader podcast. Thank you so much for investing in a better world, in a changing world, in a paradigm shift that needs to happen. So I really do appreciate our conversation today.
Well, thank you for having me and for putting up with me. I deeply appreciate
And now,
it.
it's time for Tony's 2 cents.
Wow. Wow. That's all I can say. And there's so many things that I could talk about in Tony's 2 cents that I'm really only going to bring it down to one. And the concept from Carol is that failure is a false paradigm. Failure is a false paradigm. She believes firmly in daily discovery and curiosity. And that is what should drive, or you as a person should drive us all internally. Failure is a false paradigm. Who's keeping score? Well, the only person that really potentially should be you. And as long as you're learning and discovering and curious on a day-to-day basis, you should be growing as a person. You know, there's so much to love about what Carol shares, and I really thank her from sharing her wisdom today with the audience of the Today's Leader podcast. And I hope you follow through with some of the learnings that maybe you can grab from some of Carol's books. Of course, as always, Carol's links are in the show notes. If you're looking to build better leadership skills, check out the Today's Leader website at todaysleader.com.au. We really are driving a leadership revolution to build tomorrow's best leaders today. Today's Leader is a collective, the mindset to make a difference, the ability to create an impact. Think and Grow Business hosts our Today's Leader Masterminds. Think and Grow Business, where we focus on personal, professional, and business growth. Book your free 30-minute discovery call right from the homepage at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au. Don't forget, wherever you are standing stronger, braver, and wiser. Don't forget the golden rule. Don't be an arsehole. I'll see you all again next week. Bye for now.